Hi, my name is Alicia Cunningham-Bryant. I'm an associate professor at Westminster College in the honors program. I'm the Kim T. Adamson Chair, and I'm an Egyptologist. I have my PhD in Egyptology from Yale University. I do not, however, specialize in mummification, what we're doing here today. My specialty is in funerary material culture, and I look at how cross-cultural exchange happens through the objects people leave after they die. One of the things that got me into mummification was I was teaching a class called Mummies and Zombies with a neuroscience colleague of mine. And what occurred to me in talking with my students was the objectification of mummies, how people who are mummified become objects to modern audiences, and how this actually leads to objectification of modern cultures. And I really wanted our students to decolonize that approach, to change the way they were looking at the past. And so we did this mummy demo as an opportunity for students to see the process of desiccation, but also to hold on to the humanity, or in this case, I guess the duckmanity, of animals as they're mummified. So that when they experience mummies, when they go to museum collections, they really are experiencing the past in a lived way, and they're connecting to it as real people. The demo that I'm going to do for you today, I will own, is not real mummification in the ancient Egyptian sense. It's sort of a combination of a couple of opportunities, and the reason for that is I wanted it to be something that we could do on a limited budget, that students could do at home, that would be practical and easy to manipulate depending on what kinds of materials you had available to you, and would be good for all ages. So you will hear me talk about this throughout, and I'll give you a little more background on mummification as a science and how people much more involved in it and who've spent their whole life focusing on it, what they've come to the conclusions about mummification. And then we're going to look through and sort of work through this experiment that you can do on your own at home with yourself and your kids. Mummification was a fundamental part of Egyptian religious tradition, and it was used that way as a mechanism for keeping the body corporeal and together in the afterlife. The reason for this and the focus on this was the spells themselves that were tied to mummification were necessary for a person to experience a good afterlife and to have their body whole and complete in the underworld. This becomes increasingly popular and popularized throughout the history of Egypt as this is baked into Egyptian religious tradition and funerary practice. And by the Greco-Roman period, you have pretty much everyone being mummified. So we get sort of a democratization, or everybody participating in this. And as a result, we see a huge shift in the styles of mummification, the way that it occurs, who's utilizing it, and the functions of it across time. We have several different texts that talk to us about mummification. Two of them are classical in nature, so those are Herodotus and Diodorus Siculus. And then we have two hieratic papyri, which is part of the ritual of embalming, that gives us a Greco-Roman Egyptian perspective on the process of mummification. So the procedures themselves, we understand from a human perspective through some unwrapping and studies of mummies from the Deir el-Bahri cache. And we also have some very in-depth research that's been done by Dr. Salima Ikram on animal mummies. And so a lot of what you're going to hear me talk about today is research done by Dr. Ikram. I highly recommend her. She has lots of incredible opportunities for you to engage with her research online through YouTube, and her work is incredible. So I cannot recommend it highly enough. One of the things that we're going to look at is sort of the timeline that is used for mummification. For humans, we have texts that talk about it took 70 days to embalm a person from the day of their death all the way through being entombed. And for animal mummies, we're looking at about 40 days. Partly that has to do with just mass. People are bigger, it takes longer to dry us out. Animals are smaller, and it takes less time. But we also know there's sort of different styles and strategies and approaches to mummification, and we see that play out specifically in animal mummies. There are 4 different kinds of animal mummies. We have pets. So if you ever wanted to have your pet puppy with you, that would totally make sense within the ancient Egyptian context. We have sacred animals like the Apis bull, who are considered divine animals on earth. And we have victual mummies. So like I mentioned, with people wanting their corporeal bodies in the underworld, they also wanted access to food in the underworld. So we have mummified, prepared food for the deceased. And then we have votive mummies, which are animals that were given, purchased by individuals as part of sacred religious cult, and then sort of designated and given to them as part of, given to the gods as part of an annual religious festival. So you have these sort of 4 different types of mummies, and the different types of mummies impacted the kinds of ways those animals were prepared and how they were mummified. For example, victual mummies, if you had a victual duck mummy, that mummy would be plucked and they'd have their wings clipped, they'd be all prepared to be cooked for dinner, which would not be true of a votive mummy, which would be designated in its whole self as a bird and wrapped and mummified that way. There are a number of different ways mummification occurred that takes place over that 40 days. This includes the kind of approach we're going to take today. So we'll talk a little bit more about those in a minute. Mummification has a number of different strategies, and as I mentioned, usually for people this would take place over 70 days. In best case scenarios, the mummification specialists, the embalmers, would get the mummy the minute you died. That's like the dream scenario, so that no decomposition would have taken place. However, that's not always the case. Egypt is really hot. In some ways, it's a lot like Salt Lake City. And in the summer, as you know, if you live here, it's really hot and really dry. So people who died begin to decompose pretty much immediately. And if for whatever reason your loved ones did not find you and get you to the embalmer immediately, decomp could heavily have set in by the time you were being mummified. So the sorts of processes that take place and what could be done for you when you died varied based on the quality of your corpse and how much could be done. When people were embalmed, they did so by, as many of you will imagine, having taken classes together in school, by removing the brain through the nasal cavity, and then there would be an incision made on the backside of the person to remove the internal organs, which were taken out and dried separately, and then the body was packed with natron. Natron is a mixture of sodium bicarbonate decahydrate, which is a soda ash, sodium bicarbonate, which is just baking soda, and basic table salt, NaCl. What's great about natron is it's naturally occurring in lake beds, so it could be easily gathered, and it has sort of properties that allow for the absorption of smells because it is in fact like baking soda. So you wouldn't get quite so much of the decomposition and desiccation smell as a result of using natron rather than just using salt. Animal mummification also used natron, and we have evidence of this through the millions of animal mummies that we have from ancient Egypt. And if you're surprised when I say millions, that's fair, but it's true. We have so many animal mummies from ancient Egypt. They were used as ballast in ships going to England and then used as fertilizer in in English soil. So we have lots, and the Egyptians made lots. And as a result of this, those 4 different types of mummies that I talk about, votive mummies seem to be the most populous, the ones that are most created and that we find most often. So that's what we're going to be making today, is a votive mummy. But you are actually perfectly capable of making a victual mummy at home yourself, even easier than this. So the demonstration that we're going to do today is something you can absolutely do at home. You'll see me use a fully feathered duck here. We're going to do a votive style duck mummy. But you can do a victual style duck mummy yourself by going to any grocery store and buying any frozen duck, fresh duck, if you're feeling really fancy. The key though, before you start, is to make sure that your duck is fully thawed out. The reason for that is what we're going to be doing is effectively getting this bird to decay, but decay in desiccation materials, decay within natron. And in order for that to happen, the duck needs to be thawed out. If it's not thawed out, it will putrefy or decompose because it'll be shedding all of that water, and the natron will absorb that water, not desiccate the duck. So it will take twice as long and be way gnarlier and smell way worse. You're going to notice that I'm going to wear a mask as we get to the duck as it goes further along, because as you'll see in our duck today, he's frozen. So unfortunately, in this case, she is frozen. And because she's frozen, she's going to bloat quite extensively over the next few weeks as we work with this project. So the first thing we're going to do once you have your duck is put on gloves. It may not seem super necessary this first time out, but I promise getting into the habit of it will make it way easier, because as the weeks go by, you're really going to want those gloves. So make sure you put on your gloves and that you have access to the materials you're going to need. The materials you're going to need are salt, here we have it measured out, and baking soda to make the natron, isopropyl alcohol, which you can just get at any regular pharmacy or market, gloves, some kind of cloth to soak up the isopropyl alcohol, your duck, and a plastic bin that you can seal in which to store your duck, because this is going to take you 4 weeks total in order to make this happen. So here we have our beautiful little duck buddy who's here with us and who's doing excellent work as our specimen for today. So we're first going to clean up our duck using a cloth. I use these cloths that are from auto parts and auto body stores. I like them because they're absorbent for the isopropyl alcohol, but they're not so absorbent that you can't wipe it down, and they're very cheap and you can throw them away, which again, things you're going to want to do. So the first thing that you do is clean up your duck, wipe them all down, make sure you get rid of any and all bacteria, gross things on it. We're just making sure that it's nice and clean before we add it to our natron and to our box, because we don't want any additional materials growing inside that box when we start. Next, we're going to make our natron. So the first thing that you want to do when you make your natron is to make sure you have baking soda and salt, and that you have a 2-to-1 ratio. So 2 parts baking soda to 1 part salt. How much you use depends on how heavy your duck is and how wet or dry the climate is. Weirdly, as we did this project, we had more rain than we've had in months. So I tripled the recipe. So I have 6 pounds of baking soda and 3 pounds of salt, which I've weighed out here for our strategy today. So what we're going to do is get our box and mix together the salt and the baking soda. You get to feel like you're having a real science experiment at this point. Clouds and clouds of it. And then you're really just going to mix it together, because you want to make sure that it's evenly distributed, 2 parts to 1 part. Because this is going to do all of the work for mummifying our bird. If it's not really well mixed up, you're not going to get enough salt touching the body of the duck, or enough bicarb to absorb the smell. And again, you're really going to want it to absorb that smell. So then we're going to take our little duck friend. If you are using a frozen duck and you're doing a victual mummy, your now beautifully thawed victual mummy, make sure you take out the gizzards that have been pulled out for you on the inside and wrap them separately or place them separately in your natron. And then you're going to pack your bird both inside and outside in the natron you've created. We're doing a votive bird, so in this case, sometimes those birds would be cut open and have their innards removed, but sometimes they wouldn't, and they would be put entirely contained into the natron themselves. Our bird is still frozen today, so we're really leaning into that version of events, which worked out because, again, the ancient Egyptians, much like us, are working with the materials that they have at hand with the specimen that they have on the day. So you're going to cover up your bird, make sure that they have a nice little place to rest and are totally encased in your natron. And then you're going to seal them up. I'm using these banker's boxes because theoretically they're airtight. They're not really airtight, but I like that they seal around the edges, the top to the bottom, and they have the clamps because it makes it easier for me to duct tape it shut. So then you're just going to duct tape all the way around and make sure you're covering the seal. And you're going to do that all the way around until it's totally sealed up. And then you get to just put this in a place that you aren't going to smell it for a while. I suggest a garage if you have one. If you don't have one, outside, but make sure it's in a space that animals can't get to it because again, it's going to smell even with all of that great bicarb in there. So make sure you put that away for a week, and then we're going to look at one week out. You're going to see me put my mask on because you're going to want one too. Okay, so here I am, masked up, ready for our duck that's 1 week old. This duck was also frozen, so you'll notice that when I open this, he's quite bloated. So prepare yourself, it's going to be a little gnarly. I'm going to re-glove so that we can look at our 1 week old duck. So you can already see through the side of the box how big and puffy our duck looks. Nice and big and puffy because he's full of gases from decomposition. So here is our 1 week long duck. He's still very, very puffy, and which means he's still very wet. He's barely starting to desiccate, to become a mummy. So what we're going to do is we're going to shake him off into this box. And then you can see, you can see him leaking. He's leaking all over me because he's burst as a result of the bloat. So that is what's going to be the stinky part of this. I highly recommend if this starts to get to you, if you get a little vapor rub and put it under your nose, that helps a lot. Even with the mask, it can be a pain. So what you do is you're going to take this box and you're going to throw out all of the natron inside of it, and we're just going to make some new natron. So you're really just going to throw it away. So we're going to toss out our old duct tape and throw away all of this natron. Yay! Because it is stinky. And as I mentioned with our duck leaking, you can actually see where he's leaked and where the natron is absorbing on the box itself. It's also the stinkiest part. So when I am you, and we are at my house and we're doing this, or we're at school, I always double or triple bag because it really smells. And if trash day isn't the next day, you're really toast. So what you're going to do then is do exactly what we just did with duck one. You're going to make that same ratio of bicarb and salt again, put it back in our box, and we're going to put our duck back in it. So again, you're looking at 2 to 1, in my case, 6 pounds of baking soda to 3 pounds of salt. And then we just put our duck back in, and we'll meet you here for the next week. So, after we've prepped that duck for another week, we go through it 1 more time, 2 more times, and this duck is 3 weeks along. So we've done 2 more natron changes with our duck, and here we are in week 3. This duck should be effectively almost entirely mummified, so we're going to get ready and get set to turn him into a full mummy. So this is our 3rd week duck. It should be totally finished mummifying. So we're gonna clear everything off here. My assistant's gonna help me, and we're gonna get set up for the final stages of mummification, where we're going to purify and wrap our duck and get them all ready for the underworld. So what's really great about this process is we get to see the duck all the way through from beginning to end, and we get to work through all of the different pieces and styles and elements that would have been part of mummification, even if we're doing it in a different way with sort of different materials. I'm going to change my gloves because last time we got duck juice on them, and we're going to prepare our most recent duck, this 3rd week duck, for the underworld. So again, we're going to be cutting them right out of our box. This duck was also frozen, so it took us a little longer than usual to make sure they're totally dry. But again, like our last duck, what I like, again, another thing I like about these boxes is that because they're see-through, you can see how far along you are in the process even before you've opened the box. So, I'm gonna glove up again. And this time we're not changing the natron. So I'm going to take our ducky out. I'm going to shake him off into the plastic bag because he is going to be covered in natron, and we don't want that to stick to him in the underworld. So I'm just going to prepare for duck shaking. All right. Get our little birdie. So here is our fully dried out, mostly dried out, duck. I'm gonna shake him in here. We're gonna shake him right off into the trash bag. Try to get as much of that natron off of him as possible because it just makes it harder for the next phase that we're gonna be working with. Here he is. See all of his little feathers. Keep shaking till you get as much as you can out of there. Here you can see where our ducky burst in this one during his bloat phase. And he's so much lighter than our last duck because he's lost all of that fluid. So unlike our last duck where I was still getting liquid on my gloves, this time we don't have anything like that. Just a totally complete dried out duck and lots of fluffy feathers. So most of our duck right now is feathers. You can also tell how much water and liquid we got out of that duck over those 2 weeks because look at how chunky that natron is. It's absorbed so much liquid from our duck that's not in there anymore, which is great news for us. It means it's time for us to prepare him for wrapping. So I'm going to empty our natron into our bag, save all of our noses. Well, you can't see my face, but I am making some really gnarly faces right now because even through my mask, this stinks. Again, I cannot say enough good things about double bagging. All right. Throw my old gloves right away, back with our other materials. Okay, so here we are, ready, whoops, except that we're stuck, for the final phase of duck mummification. So what we're gonna use to sort of anoint and clean our duck like we would with votive mummification is pine tar. You can still buy this. It's actually really very straightforward. You use it on horses' hooves still. So there's really good accessibility for this at most feed and ag stores. What's great about it is it keeps bugs away. So the smell of it masks some of the smell of our duck, but it also genuinely keeps it cleaner and protects that sort of corporeal shape and what the duck would have wanted, what people would have wanted in mummification for the whole being through this process. I use these sort of foam painter's brushes. I find them really useful. They're also really cheap to buy in bulk, which you're going to want to do with this because especially if you have more than one person working on this, nice cheap brushes, you're just going to throw them away. Again, you're not going to reuse your mummification brushes. So by all means, go cheap. And then you're just going to dunk them in the pine tar, get it nice and gooey. And going with the feathers, you're just going to paint it down our duck. Sometimes, depending on how sticky our duck is, I'll just pour it on and then paint. We have a lot of evidence from animal mummification of these sort of resins that are poured and put on ducks and other animals in this votive, well, not necessarily on ducks, but on animals used in votive offerings. So this sort of resiny, rosin-based pine tar, which is created from pine trees and is naturally occurring, aligns well with that practice. It's not exactly the same. Again, these are all modern correlates, but and things that you could get at the market yourself. But it does sort of mimic that same experience. So you just paint it all over our ducky friend, under his wings, on his little feet, all over his bill. I probably should have said at the beginning, having a nice plastic tarp on which to do this is an excellent life choice. You'll see me, I'm using both the plastic tarp and the plastic lid because it gets everywhere. And you're just going to cover your whole duck. What got me really excited about this, doing it with my students, was it was not only transformative for them about how we see an animal maintain its autonomy, still be an animal through this whole process. We lose that sort of object quality to it. The duck maintains its reality for us as the embalmers, but also there's something really sort of exciting about the experience of doing this and participating in it, not just from an removal of objectification standpoint, but from an experiential standpoint. Becoming the embalmer really brings us closer to the past. And in fact, finding out when I was mimicking this and sort of creating this mid-space project between an elementary school chicken project and the incredible work of Dr. Ikram was that you can really buy these products still. Like, we're still using pine tar on horse hooves. And what you're going to see in a minute is another product that we're still using that mimics and aligns with the ancient world. So I love that sort of corollary between the modern world and the ancient, which is not only making this less of an object to me, it's still very much ducky, but it's also bringing me closer to, it was an experience closer to the past. And I know myself and my students felt very powerfully that aspect of it. So now that our ducky has been all nice and covered in our pine tar, give him one more little corner there, we are going to wrap him up. So we're going to use a 21st Dynasty wrapping technique. I'm going to change my gloves. So many gloves, so many. Thank goodness they come in packs of hundreds. So I'm using regular gauze. Originally, they would have used linen bandages. And in fact, you can write hieroglyph spells, well, spells written in hieroglyphs onto the bandages if you like for your duck, or whatever bird you're doing. You'll see in our final bird, my wonderful assistant who was helping me a minute ago did that for our bird. But you can also just use regular gauze. It's a little harder to write on with Sharpie. I suggest putting lots of paper underneath it, but it's totally possible. So 21st dynasty is relatively late in mummification in Egypt, but the wrapping practices I like for this because it keeps the coherence of the duck all together. So these practices include starting with the extremities, wrapping each of those individually, and then wrapping the whole duck. So you're going to see me go through a lot of gauze. It's just how I work. But I'm going to start with the head, and we're just going to wrap it nice and easy, quick and around. You don't have to make it particularly beautiful, although by all means, go nuts if you are really good at it. I am not. I recognize my own failings. All right, so get the head all done. Grab my scissors, which are stuck in duct tape. Classic. All right. Cut that off. Then we're gonna do the wings. So, insofar as we can, just wrap that wing individually. And again, part of this is to keep the coherence of those extremities so that they don't fall off or become additionally damaged through the mummification process and through time and further desiccation. So by keeping them all together, you keep that full corporeal body for the animal or the person in the afterlife. That gets us to our first little foot over here. So you can see his little foot. Just gonna wrap it right up. His foot is so wonderfully mummified, y'all. It's incredible. It's perfectly preserved, nice and hard and desiccated, but it is really beautifully done. So if we had any concerns that our duck wasn't really mummified, that really cinches it for me. Do one more leg over here, and we'll do his last little wing. Okay, so again, you have that great, like, you can just see how perfectly preserved his leg is. Want to get those toes in there so he doesn't lose them. It'd be sad if he had to waddle around in the afterlife with no toes. I would be sad if I was him. It would be a bummer. Okay, final wing. So we're gonna pull that right out. Let's see if we can go the other direction with my gauze. And you can see how he's already sort of lost his feathers, so we want to make sure that we're getting all of those little bones. Just wrapping them right up, preserving as much of his feathers as we can. Wrap and roll, roll and wrap. So much fun. Look at him. Oh, let's tuck his feathers in. We don't want him to lose them. Don't want him to be naked in the underworld. All right. Finish wrapping that little wing. Just use out this gauze. Perfect. Okay, so now we're gonna do the big wrap, which is gonna be an adventure. Everybody ready? So most votive bird offerings have their heads tucked back along their back, just like our bird. So we're gonna keep him just like this, with all of those little extremities we've wrapped up tucked right in. So I'm gonna start, and I like unrolling my gauze from the bottom. I find it easier to wrap, but I'm also left-handed, so maybe that's just me. So I like to start in the middle. So you just get a whole little wrap in there, and you start by tucking his head in so that we don't have any flopping while we're wrapping the rest of him. So just wrapping him right up, all the way around. That little duck tail in there. Woohoo. Okay. Then we'll start another roll. I'm going to be very judicious in my, or I guess the opposite of judicious, extravagant in my use of gauze, because I don't want the pine tar and the duck to bleed out of our wrapping. But you can see because he's so well mummified, once you've got that wrapping done, he really does hold together exceptionally well. And it's relatively easy to wrap him up. So going around, wrapping his little duck top. Let's get that in there. Do another one. Okay, starting at the top, because that was our thinnest place. And again, so you can see how that pine tar is just coming through. So we want to keep going with that gauze till we don't see the pine tar seeping anymore. We want to keep all those bugs out, but we also want to keep the continuity of our little buddy. More. Oh, that is the roll of gauze that wants to participate. Okay, start there. All right, we're looking pretty good, y'all. So at this point, if you had hieroglyphs on gauze or on linen that you wanted to include, I would start rolling that one out. And you can find really good Book of the Dead spells that you can copy in hieroglyphs in the book How to Write in Ancient Egyptian. If you're interested, there's really excellent options. So we've reached the end of our duck. Look at what a beautiful little mummy. Now we're going to seal him. So this is that last piece that I mentioned that I think is so interesting that we're still using today. And that is bitumen, otherwise known as roofing tar. But it's also ancient pitch, which would have been used to seal the hull of boats, or in this case, to sort of create the ends of our mummy wrappings. And we have evidence of that on animal mummies. So you're just going to, you don't have to use a lot of this. We are not coating our duck in this at all. Just a little bit. Just sort of dab it on, seal it up, dab it on, seal them up. Sort of like you're licking an envelope, I guess. But in this case, you just want to make sure that you're creating a nice solid seal so that you don't have these sort of open spaces in our mummy, because that's where bugs or other creatures could get in and would break down the structural integrity of our little feathered friend here, who has been such a good sport at being mummified. It would be a shame for it to change now. Just do it right up here at the top too. Just gonna tack that down. And you have a completed mummy. So now you need your bitumen to set. So you're gonna put him back in his box. Head up. It's okay if it's a little gnarly on your lid now. You're just gonna close it up. Your mummy is done. I would leave him for 1 more week, just so you get that bitumen to really set. Your mummy is totally finished. And then feel free to bury them. Give them the rites and rituals and respect that they deserve. And I hope that the process really helps you have that experience. So now we're just going to get to our final, finished, totally complete duck. Here he is. Look at our beautiful duck 1 week after being wrapped. As you'll see on this duck, our final duck, we have some hieroglyphs written right here. This is in Middle Egyptian. There's multiple periods of the Egyptian language, Old, Middle, and Late Egyptian, as well as Coptic and Demotic. Old, Middle, and Late are all written in the same script, the same writing system, which is hieroglyphs, as represented here, or in hieratic, which is the cursive script, but we're using hieroglyphs on our bird. And this particular bird and these particular glyphs are the name of this beautiful, wonderful mummified duck, as given him by my wonderful assistant Cody, who named him Mum Ugly Duckling, which I translated to be the ugly small duck who has been embalmed. So you have the actual use here of the glyphs to name the bird, and there are some animal mummies and human mummies with their names on their wrappings. The language itself is used in the spells in the Book of the Dead and in the coffin texts. Coffin texts are first, followed by the Book of the Dead. And those particular spells are necessary, along with the mummification of the body, for complete positive experiences in the underworld. If you don't have the right knowledge, the right rechu, which is the ancient Egyptian word for knowledge, if you don't know the right spells, you're not going to be able to have a successful afterlife. So you want to make sure that you're buried with the appropriate spells, that you know the right spells, that they're on you, and that your name is with you in some fashion or other, because your name, when it's spoken, helps give you life. So this particular duck, doing great, Mum Ugly Duckling, and have his name spoken forever. And so if you are interested in doing that with your own duck, I encourage you to come to the Egypt exhibit here. There's a whole section on writing. You can learn about it. You can see a section of the Book of the Dead. Feel free to use some of those spells and create your own name for your own bird. It's an exceptional opportunity to engage with the language, the history, but also to de-objectify your mummy. This is Mum Ugly Duckling. He's been Mum Ugly Duckling since we started. He will continue forever into the afterlife as such. And he gets to have that personality and that experience for myself, for my wonderful assistant, in forever. And so I hope you get to do that. I hope this demonstration and experience gives you the opportunity to engage with the past in a really profound way and help sort of break apart the feelings we have that take us away from mummies, that take us, sort of separate us from the past, and help us sort of bridge those gaps to see the power of the past, how much influence it has on us today, and how much value it has when we talk about people. So thank you so much. Good luck with your ducks.